Salutations, respected viewers. In this video, I'm going to tell you more about the outbreak of the Troubles in 1969. So we're in August, it's been the marching season, rioting in Derry over the apprentice boys of Derry March, and the Bogside has effectively broken away from Northern Ireland. The Bogside is the western part of Derry, west of the River Foyle. It's an overwhelmingly Catholic and working class area. Loyalist thugs were attacking Catholic families in Belfast in particular, and some Republican thugs attacking Protestant families there, though rather less of that. So the Republic of Ireland watched this with anxious solicitude. The Taoiseach Prime Minister was Jack Lynch, and his party, Fianna Fáil, was the more nationalist of the two major parties in the south of Ireland. And remember, the Irish government's long-term objective was for Northern Ireland to join the Republic of Ireland as a unitary state. So Lynch went on television saying that they could not stand by and watch people injured and perhaps worse, implying they were going to get killed, which indeed happened. So the Irish army moved up near the border and set up first aid stations. The rumour got around nationalist areas of Derry in particular that the Irish army was going to come in. And indeed, there was a secret plan to do that, incursions, just to come into overwhelmingly nationalist areas of Northern Ireland. In fact, it never happened. The Irish army concluded it was militarily unsound. The Irish military had about 3 combat jets. The United Kingdom was a nuclear power. You can work out how that was going to end. Not that anyone was going to use nuclear arms, but the British army was just so much bigger and better equipped, had plenty of combat experience. So Lynch was under great pressure to do something, and a lot of people felt great sympathy for what was happening to the nationalist community in the north at the time. Jack Lynch said that the RUC was no longer accepted as an impartial force, which is intriguing since it implies the RUC was previously regarded as being impartial. Likewise, he said the British Army restoring order on the streets was not acceptable. He calls for the United Nations to intervene, which is actually not a bad idea. It's probably perhaps the best suggestion which wasn't followed up. But by this stage, how many people had been killed in the Troubles in Northern Ireland? Not a lot, about 10. It was about to get an awful lot worse. So Lynch's plan was Operation Armageddon to invade, which didn't happen because it really was going to be if there was a total meltdown in the situation. The British Army was 200,000 strong, the Irish army about 10,000 strong. Anyhow, the Republic of Ireland was also hoping to join the European Economic Community, as it was then called. It's now the EU. And if the Irish Republic had done that, then the Irish application to the EEC would have been scuppered. So that's one of the many reasons why we didn't do it. So Jim Callaghan, the Home Secretary, walked around the Bogside of Derry, and he was very courteously received. Harold Wilson tried to reassure the Unionist community, saying the border is not an issue. He was going to deal with NICRA's concerns, but there was no prospect of Northern Ireland having to join the Irish Republic. Lord Hunt, a judge, was commissioned to look into the Royal Ulster Constabulary, particularly the B Specials. So this was Her Majesty's government's approach, was to try and investigate nationalist grievances and see if these could be resolved. So the IRA became active, had been largely dormant for a few years. Guns which had been buried for decades were dug up. Sinn Féin was the IRA's political party. It means ourselves alone. Sinn Féin and the IRA were largely the same thing. Many people were members of both. And they contested elections in Northern Ireland. They'd even had a few people elected in the 50s. But they would never enter Stormont because it was a partitionist parliament, as they said, because Ireland must not be divided, partitioned. They would not enter the British Parliament at London because that involves swearing an oath to Her Majesty the Queen, and Sinn Féin maintain that the British monarch has no legitimacy in any part of Ireland. Anyhow, people began bringing guns to Sinn Féin's office in Dublin. I was about to say the IRA's office, but largely the same thing. So the IRA split around this time. Since the failure of their border campaign, the late 50s, the IRA had been flirting with Marxism. Bear in mind the 60s, Marxism was intellectually en vogue on the left, and the IRA, being a revolutionary movement, was certainly left-wing. And they'd said, well, should we reach out to the Protestant working class in the north? Because the IRA had virtually no Protestant support, and indeed was detested by most Protestants in Northern Ireland. Anyway, this time the IRA split into the official IRA and the provisional IRA. The official IRA, despite its name, was much smaller, and they're the ones who took a Marxist line, said we try to unite the working class, Protestant and Catholic, and only then try and split from Great Britain. They didn't try to unite the working class of Ireland and Great Britain, incidentally. Whereas the provisional IRA said this is nonsense, we mustn't be messing around with Marxism, and they weren't anti-Protestant explicitly, though in practice they often were, but they said reaching out to the Protestant working class is a bit far-fetched and unrealistic. So the provisional IRA was more traditionalist, ultra-nationalist, more Catholic in outlook, and neither party split. You could say official Sinn Féin, provisional Sinn Féin. The Sinn Féin that exists today is a descendant of provisional Sinn Féin, though the word provisional is not used now at all. So the more bellicose and youthful element was in the provisionals. Provos are sometimes called provies. At a certain meeting, they were putting on Easter lilies. So each April, IRA supporters wear Easter lilies to commemorate the 1916 Easter Rising. And do you pin them on or do you stick them on with gum? Well, the official IRA was sticking them on with gum, became known as stickies. The provisionals were pinning them on. People sometimes call them pinheads, which can be derogatory. Anyway, so the IRA, both factions felt their primary aim was to defend Catholic areas. Why not Protestant areas? Well, I suppose because they were attacking those ones. And their second objective was then to go on an attack against the Crown forces, the RUC and the British Army. So some Catholics fled Northern Ireland and moved to Southern Ireland. The Irish government set aside £100,000 Irish pounds to help these refugees. Some of them went as far south as Kerry. Now, Charlie Haughey was a cabinet minister in the Irish government at the time, Minister for Justice. He was accused of illegally importing weapons to provide them to the Provisional IRA and had an Irish Army officer as his link man. There was the arms trial in 1970. Haughey and a couple of other ministers went on trial. Anyway, they were found not guilty. He died in 2005. Some people think that he did actually do it. 2006. Haughey had been known for burning the British flag in Dublin on VE Day 1945. Anyway, so the conflict had burst out in the summer of 1969. There was an attempt to burn down St Matthew's Church in Belfast, which is on the east side of the river, and there's a small Catholic enclave there. However, loyalists tell a different story, say that's not happening. That's not true. There'd been an Orange March. People came back from that. They had a bit to drink. They were in high spirits. They were singing noisily. And some Catholics felt this was menacing and felt they're going to be attacked. And some loyalists maintained there was no attempt to attack the church. The IRA got jumpy and started firing at the loyalists. And some of these loyalists had terrorist friends who started firing back. And that's what happened. Anyway, I mentioned the Hunt report. So Lord Hunt returned his report in 1970. Found there was not a single Catholic in the B Specials, though Catholics were permitted to join, that it was poorly equipped and led. Anyway, he recommended that the B Specials be disbanded and the whole of the RUC be disarmed. The British government did the former, not the latter, so they briefly disarmed the RUC, but several of them got killed, so they had to be rearmed. The UDR was created as a response to this Ulster Defence Regiment because the RUC had a counterinsurgent role, so sometimes it was quasi-military, and the UDR was a regiment of the British Army, but they're all part-timers, soldiers who did their ordinary job, whatever that was, and 1 or 2 days a week would do military duties, a bit like the Territorial Army in the rest of the UK. So the conflict was bubbling on into 1970. Anyway, June 1970, the Labour Party had a shock defeat. The Conservatives under Edward Heath came to office. Some Unionists were jubilant because they remembered the Tories' proper name was the Conservative and Unionist Party. They felt to be more supportive of them. But Heath was also pushing for reform. So in 1970, the relationship between the British Army and the Catholic community began to break down. So there were house searches because people were aware that there were IRA weapons. These were not always conducted politely, and the IRA had been aghast that there had been fairly good relations between the British military and the Catholic community. The UDR started recruiting. Initially, a lot of Catholics joined, partly because another regiment had been disbanded recently, which had many Catholic soldiers from the north in it. And however, as the conflict picked up, a lot of Catholics resigned from the UDR or indeed simply stopped showing up to duty, were deemed to have resigned. The UDR had to man roadblocks. Some members of the UDR were also in loyalist terrorist outfits. So the UDR's reputation was not good amongst the Catholic community, to say the least. Former B Specials all had application forms sent to them, inviting them to join the UDR, and many of them did, Ken McGuinness being a case in point. Well, that's all for the moment.